Welcome to Podkey Daily News, your fast brief on markets, war, tech, and policy. Today's through line is pressure on governments trying to borrow, on militaries trying to sustain deployments, and on tech companies being forced to answer for product design. A few of these stories have immediate balance sheet or security consequences, and they're worth watching closely. The biggest practical market story is the global bond sell-off. Long-term government borrowing costs have pushed up to multi-decade highs across major markets, including 30-year U.S. Treasury yields, at levels not seen in about 19 years, with Germany, France, and Japan also seeing long-end yields at decade-plus highs. What's driving it is a synchronized repricing. Inflation worries are back. Oil is higher, deficits are large, issuance is heavy from both governments and companies, and demand just isn't keeping up with supply. That matters because if these higher yields stick, the cost of money rises across the system. Governments pay more to finance debt, companies pay more to raise capital, households face higher borrowing costs, and equities can lose support if bonds start offering more compelling returns. The other risk is feedback. Higher yields increase debt servicing costs, which can mean even more borrowing, which can mean even more supply hitting the market. What to watch next is whether oil eases enough to calm inflation fears and whether demand returns at upcoming bond sales. If not, this starts to look less like a temporary wobble and more like a structural reset. In California, Meta is facing a major child safety trial brought by a coalition of states that says Facebook and Instagram were built with addictive features aimed at adolescents, including infinite scroll, autoplay, push alerts, likes, and recommendation systems tuned for engagement. The legal strategy matters. Plaintiffs are going after product design under state consumer protection law rather than relying on fights over third-party content, which gives them a different path around the usual platform defenses. They also say Meta's internal research undercut its public safety claims, including findings that roughly a quarter of 13-year-olds encountered bullying, nudity, or violence. Meta denies intentionally harming young users and says some safety measures reduced engagement. This trial is expected to run at least 6 weeks, could surface damaging internal emails, and may bring in senior executives, potentially including Mark Zuckerberg. The jury verdict would be advisory, with the judge deciding the final remedy. Why it matters is simple. This is one of the clearest tests yet of whether courts will treat engagement-maximizing design itself as the problem. The money at stake is enormous, but the bigger risk for Meta may be forced product changes. Two defense stories connect here. First, the USS Abraham Lincoln has reportedly been at sea far beyond a normal deployment, around 270 days, and the strain is showing in morale, fatigue, food quality, logistics, and basic safety on a flight deck where chronic exhaustion can get people killed. A key reason is logistics. Bahrain's naval support hub was knocked out early in the conflict, and the next workable resupply point is more than 2,000 miles away at Diego Garcia, which wrecks the normal rhythm of replenishment and maintenance. This is also exposing a force structure problem. The Navy has 11 carriers, several are unavailable, and shifting the USS George Washington from Japan to the Middle East leaves a carrier gap in the Western Pacific. At the same time, U.S. interceptor missile stockpiles reportedly fell by about 2/3 during the Iran war. Analysts had already warned inventories were too thin for a high-intensity contingency, so this isn't just a recent depletion story. Taken together, the issue is readiness. The U.S. is burning through scarce high-end assets in the present, while narrowing its margin for deterrence in the Pacific. Ukraine's deep strike drone campaign is scaling up again, with Russia saying one attack involved more than 600 drones aimed at Moscow and other sites deep inside Russia. Britain has now confirmed its drone technology was used and approved a roughly $4 billion package to supply about 120,000 drones across strike, reconnaissance, naval, and heavy lift roles, along with counter-jamming systems. The practical significance is that Ukraine is hitting logistics, oil facilities, and defense industrial targets, while the UK is effectively turning this war into a live testbed for its drone systems. What to watch is winter. Ukrainian officials are warning that pressure on electricity, heating, and water systems will rise, while Russia is framing the UK role as direct escalation. Despite political efforts to roll back incentives, 2026 is still shaping up as a record year for new renewable projects. The core reason is economics. Solar and wind remain among the cheapest and fastest sources of new power, and electricity demand is climbing because of data centers and EVs. Policy changes are creating a rush rather than a freeze. Reported U.S. deadlines tied to preserving tax credits are pushing developers to start projects sooner, even if some of the actual build-out will be slowed by transformer shortages and skilled labor gaps. Opposition is uneven. Offshore wind has taken the hardest political hits, while solar has faced somewhat less resistance. Nuclear and geothermal are less contested politically, but still constrained by high capital costs and grid connection problems. The key watch item is whether the AI data center build-out holds up, because that demand growth is helping keep the near-term case for adding generation very strong. In science and education, the signal is mixed and messy. Agencies like NIH are reporting stable or rising budgets, but watchdogs say billions in previously promised university funding have been cut after earlier commitments were canceled. Researchers are trying to fill the gap with foundations, corporations, and industry partnerships, but that works unevenly across fields and raises obvious concerns about conflicts of interest and pressure to favor politically preferred or commercially attractive work. A proposed White House rule that would give the administration more influence over grants while prioritizing areas like AI and quantum is drawing concern that basic science could become more politicized. On the AI side, OpenAI has launched a teen version of ChatGPT with a study mode designed to help students structure essays without simply writing assignments for them, alongside stronger defaults around self-harm, eating disorders, and violence. That's relevant because the policy direction is converging on age-specific safeguards and more direct accountability for product behavior, which is the same pressure now landing on Meta in court. The U.S. has imposed sanctions on senior International Criminal Court officials, adding to measures already targeting multiple ICC staff, while reportedly lobbying more than 120 member countries to pull out of or weaken the court. Washington is presenting the ICC as a threat to U.S. sovereignty, while the court says the sanctions undermine the rule of law. Why this matters is broader than the institution itself. If major powers are willing to actively degrade multilateral legal mechanisms when those mechanisms become inconvenient, that changes expectations around accountability and enforcement far beyond any single case. One undercovered emergency to keep in view is the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It has infected more than 5,000 people and killed over 2,300, making it one of the country's largest and deadliest outbreaks. The World Health Organization says transmission is unprecedented and far from controlled. Insecurity, weak transport and health infrastructure, community distrust, and simultaneous measles and cholera outbreaks are all making response efforts harder. This outbreak involves the rarer Bundibugyo strain. 2 vaccines are now in human trials, and about 2,000 doses of a vaccine developed for the Zaire strain have been sent after showing possible cross-protection. The next thing to watch is whether responders can contain spread despite the operational obstacles, because the public health challenge here is still moving in the wrong direction. Those are the developments with the clearest near-term impact today. You're listening to Podkey Daily News. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.
Podkey.